All right, so we will go ahead and get started. Thank you for coming, everyone. My name is Christy Adelman Ritter from the Connect and Communicate Series Planning Committee, and I'll be moderating this session along with Rana Lee Choco. So thank you for joining us for the Connect and Communicate series presenting academic librarians, STEM research and research data management, oh my. This discussion is being recorded and will be made available to Pennsylvania Library Association College and Research Division members through the PALA website, as well as sent to registrants and available on the CRD blog. For this discussion, you only need a headset or speakers. We do encourage you to ask questions in the chat box at the bottom right throughout the discussion, and we will attempt to include your questions as appropriate during the discussion or at the end. Brianna and Andrea are both okay if we ask questions throughout, so don't feel like you have to hold all of them. We'll also do our best to assist you if you have any technical issues, post those in the chat as well. This session is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Library Association College and Research Division's Connect and Communicate series. I'd like to thank the CRD board for supporting the Connect and Communicate initiative and the other Connect and Communicate planning members, including Adam Balchunas, Diane Porterfield, and Amy Snyder. Please contact any one of the team for information about becoming a PALA member. This project is made possible by a grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services as administered by the Pennsylvania Department of Education through the Office of Commonwealth Libraries and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Tom Wolf, Governor. Told you there was a lot of talking. And finally, I'd like to thank and introduce our presenters for today's event. Andrea Pritt is the STEM librarian at the Penn State Harrisburg Library, and Brianna Wham is the research data librarian for STEM at Penn State University. So with that, I'd like to welcome Andrea and Brianna and turn the presentation over to them.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Christy. You weren't joking with all of the stuff you had to say, so I appreciate you having that ready to go.
There is so much.
Yes, and as a CRD member for a while, there's always something. So we appreciate that. Before we begin, I hope everyone can see our screen share right now. We came prepared with a few slides, but Brianna and I are really hoping that this will be as interactive as you would like it to be. So as Christy said, feel free to type in your questions in the chat at any point and we'll answer them as we go through. Or if you feel comfortable, well, you're welcome to unmute yourself and, ask us to repeat something or ask your question that way. Brianna and I are really flexible with our presentations like this. So just keep that in mind. And before we begin, I guess we'll introduce ourselves again, just very briefly. As Christy said, I am Andrea Pritt, and I'm the STEM librarian and our data and collections coordinator here at Penn State Harrisburg with the University Libraries. So just briefly in my role, I serve our School of Science, Engineering, and Technology. I have a background in STEM. My undergraduate degree is in vertebrate and invertebrate zoology. So I've always been pretty interested in science in general. And then I have a master's degree from Pitt in library science. And before I hand it over to Brianna, we would really like for all of you, if you feel comfortable, just type in your name, your title, and what library you're visiting us from or you're watching from today, if you feel comfortable doing that in the chat, just so we can kind of get an idea of who's here. And then now I'll pass over to Brianna.
Thanks, Andrea. Hi, everyone, and thank you for having me here today. I'm Brianna Wham, and I'm the Research Data Librarian STEM and the Data Learning Center Manager at Penn State University Libraries in our Research Informatics and Publishing department. And in that role, I'm supporting researchers throughout the research lifecycle with data management planning, data analysis, and data sharing and publication. And my background is also in the STEM disciplines. I have an undergraduate degree in biology, and then I have a PhD in entomology, or the study of insects, where I studied bumblebee disease dynamics. I'm looking forward to getting to meet all of you virtually here today.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks everyone for sharing where you're visiting or where you're watching from. It's nice to see a lot of folks who I recognize your name. We probably worked together before, but thanks for joining us. So before we totally jump into our slides, Brianna and I were just interested if you could either write a sentence or something in the chat or rank yourself from 1 to 5, maybe 5 being expert and 1 being pretty novice, or how comfortable you feel with the topic research data management. You don't really have to elaborate on what you think it means just yet. We will ask for some of that, but we kind of just wanted to get an idea of who's in the audience and, your familiarity with it, whether you work with research data management all the time in your professional job right now, or if you're brand new to the topic and you're interested in learning more. So this is great. Thank you. And Brianna, I hope you can see everything. Brianna's sharing our slides, so hopefully you can see things in the chat, Brianna, but this is great. So we have a mix of folks, and I would say, just as full disclosure, I would rank myself somewhere between a 3, aspiring 4, maybe. Brianna, I don't know if you would rank yourself anywhere on that.
Probably around a 4.
Yeah, I was like maybe even a 5 for Brianna's too. So we really appreciate this. And from if you saw our kind of short description of the session, we've tweaked it a little because we are interested in, like, if there's new folks to the topic here, we want to give some background, which we'll do. And we're also going to be talking briefly about our recent project. So this is great. Emma, I don't think you overrated yourself. I think sometimes, those numbers are arbitrary, right? We don't know what they mean for each of us. So thanks for sharing that, everyone, in the chat. We really appreciate it. So Brianna, if you want to click to the next slide. So today, Brianna and I just have a few learning objectives we wanted to share. We want to define and kind of explain the fundamentals of research data management and what we mean by that. We want to share and identify reasons why your researchers may need these skills. And I do want to say briefly, and we'll mention this a few times throughout, I think, just because Brianna and I are coming to this front with our STEM background and some STEM expertise, and that's our primary constituents, the things we're going to share today don't have to be related just to STEM folks or STEM researchers. So keep that in mind. We want to illustrate some of the ways that academic library employees can assist with enhancing RDM, at your local institution. And then we're also going to provide some resources for learning more about the topic. Brianna and I are constantly learning. I'm always trying to find more books or journal articles or websites where I can do a little bit more learning on my own too. So we will share all of that with you throughout the session. So thanks, Brianna. Today's agenda just matches and kind of mirrors our learning objectives. We're going through maybe like 4 big types or 4 sections of our presentation. And again, feel free to interrupt us at any time if you have questions or if you'd like to know more. So briefly, again, I know we're asking you to do a lot in the chat or unmute yourself, but if you could share, what does data mean to you, or what are data to you? And there's no right or wrong answer here. You can type in, 1 or 2 words in the chat or unmute yourself. And again, it doesn't have to be, don't think like it has to be science related. If you've worked with data in the past, or you've worked with your researchers on their projects, or maybe you're at a circulation desk a lot of the time and data is how many checkouts an item got. So you can take a second to consider that and share if you'd like. Yeah, thanks, Chrissy. Any sort of set of information, measurements, statistics, that's great. And analysis of statistics, that's fantastic. Guides for the future, that's great. Yes, circulation department mainly. For me, and again, because we're asking you to share, Brianna and I will share too, some of my recent data that I've worked on. I have researched and published in kind of diversity of STEM collections in our juvenile collection here at Penn State Harrisburg. So some of the data that I used for that were, titles of books, checkout numbers, if they were available in our library system, and compared to other Big Ten schools or ACRL schools. So I think data can be a lot of different things for all of us. I'm sure you would all agree. Brianna, I don't know if you want to share what data are to you.
Yeah, and I was going to say data can be really, as Andrew was saying, diverse and unique depending on kind of the discipline or the area that you're researching. And so to give a little bit of a contrast, I'm going to kind of refer back to some of my PhD work working with bees. And in that scenario, data were things like counts of bees on flowers. It could be things like genetic sequences extracted from bees, observations of behavior, All of that is data.
So that's great. Thanks, everyone. Brianna, I don't know if you want to switch to the next slide. Thank you. So as Brianna said, as you all, I'm sure, are already know or aware of, right? Data can be almost anything, and it doesn't have to be just mathematical or numerical data. It could be temperature readings. It could be number of bee visits to a flower, photographs. It could be literature or textual data that a researcher is mining. It could be software code. So there's so many things that data are, and it really just depends on what you are currently working on or what your faculty members are, how you're assisting them. But we want to make sure that we note in all of our presentations, Brianna and I like to say that data, while it can come in all sorts of forms and all disciplines, not just STEM, it doesn't equal knowledge, right? So data, we can have a lot of data, but unless we're doing something to the data, there's no way for us to turn that into knowledge. So we like this kind of graphic of data, we use it to, and we do something to it, right? Maybe we analyze it, maybe we transform it, something like that. And we're trying ultimately to use our data to turn it into information. And then we're going to use that information to turn it into knowledge about whatever our research project is, or the data we have, right? So first you need to make sure, and what we would argue and advocate for is we want to make sure that our data that we're working with, or our faculty is we're turning it into usable information, right? So that way it can be used by ourselves or other researchers. And we'll touch upon this later in the session, and we have some resources for you. But Brianna and I like to remind folks that what we mean about data, I guess, is that we're making it fair, and that's just FAIR. And these FAIR principles are something that really guide the realm and the environment around research data management. And the F stands for findable, if you're not familiar. So it's F for findable, A for accessible, I for interoperable, and R for reusable. So those are four really big key components, we would say, to making your data useful and reusable, and being able to set it up so that we can turn it into knowledge later on throughout your projects. And again, we'll touch upon that throughout the session today. But Brianna, if you want to switch to our next slide. So here, like I said, kind of the first piece of the first section, we're going to talk about just the fundamentals to research data management. And Brianna, if you want to switch. So what we mean by research data management, this is a very general description. There are a lot of different definitions. And if you're familiar with the topic, I'm sure you've seen those, right? We're calling it generally, it's the organization, care, and management of data collected or data created during a research project. Here you'll see two examples of the research data lifecycle, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, or you have seen before in some capacity. There are hundreds of these, if not thousands, right? So you can see the one on the left is from TU Dresden. The one on the right is from the Digital Curation Center. They could be as kind of, I don't want to say plain, but maybe succinct and clear and concise as the one on the left, where there's clear steps and it's kind of a cycle that you're going through clockwise. The Digital Curation Center research data lifecycle on the right-hand side is kind of more involved. You'll see that there are several rings, and working from the inner ring all the way to the outer, you're going to see arrows going in all sorts of directions, right? And maybe you are accessing one specific point of this data lifecycle. Maybe you as an academic librarian are helping researchers with one small piece of the data lifecycle. And we just want to make sure that you're aware of, you don't need to be helping folks with every single piece of what this data lifecycle is, right? That would be asking a lot of all of us. And maybe in your own research projects, or when you're writing or researching for your institution, or perhaps you're publishing, you may not go through all of these steps for your own research work either. And we're not here to say that that's good or bad. We're just saying, in general, here's the life cycle of a piece of data or a set of data. And we're going to talk about how we can help folks with that. And in fact, our researchers in STEM, for Brianna and I. So perfect. Thanks, Brianna. So this is an image coming from one of our colleagues who it's been recently published in a book. So you'll see that by breaking up the research process into phases, you're better able to understand the place where data management takes place for each step of the research project. So this is, at first glance, might be pretty elaborate, kind of distracting image maybe. There's a lot going on in it. But what we wanted to mention and what our colleague wanted to share when they created this is to understand the different strategies needed to manage your data over time. It's useful to examine the role of data in each part of this research process. So if you can see kind of the bolded arrow lines, that main cycle or circle, you'll see, at first, perhaps in a research project, you're conceptualizing your research data. What do you want to know about that topic or that experiment, that sort of thing? And then if you move clockwise down, you're going to review the literature, right? So again, it's similar to a data life cycle, sort of a research project life cycle. And then what you can see kind of on the outer spots of the image here, or the dotted line arrows that you see, not the solid ones, there's a lot of data management practices that a researcher would go through to make sure that their research project, right, is moving smoothly and they're managing it in the best way possible. They're making sure it's organized so it can be reusable or shared. So you'll see things like version control, kind of at the bottom left. You'll see how they share it with their scholarly outputs, whether it's articles, a report for your supervisor or for your library board, something like that. So there's a lot going on here. And Brianna, I don't know if you want to, feel free, obviously, to jump in at any point. But if we move to the next slide quickly, we'll see that here are the different aspects of research data management that Brianna and I would identify, right? So in practice, data management can kind of be grouped and broken down into these pieces. So data management plans, file name, versioning, data documentation and metadata standards or metadata practices, the legal and ethical concerns, right? Of perhaps, an IRB you have to go through, or your faculty members have to go through. We'll talk about data storage and backup and data archiving and preserving your data so that it's available in the long run. And as librarians and library employees, we know a lot about that. And then data sharing and reuse, so making sure that it's, openly available if you want it to be, and shared with, folks automatically and not waiting for someone to ask for that data, right? So why do researchers need research data management? And you can feel free, there's several different reasons why your researchers may need it. Feel free to type those in the chat if you know of those. Brianna and I, like I said, we're going to just briefly go through this. There are a bunch of reasons why our researchers, or you as a researcher, would need research data management skills, or why perhaps you would want them. We're going to touch upon two that are pretty maybe obvious for STEM researchers and the researchers we work with. And Brianna, if you want to move to the next one, the first one for us, it would be really important for our researchers, is because funding agencies require it, right? Some form of research data management. All of these agencies you see on the slide, and of course, this is just a small handful. There's 10 on here maybe, or 8, I don't know. Each funding agency in some capacity will require a form of research data management, whether that's a data management plan to share, and explicitly state how you plan on sharing and preserving and archiving your data, versus some of them require you to share all of the raw data openly within the first year of publication or automatically on publication, right? So, and this isn't just the United States. Europe and Great Britain have been doing this for a long time as well. If you remember, I forget if it was 2008, maybe, President Obama at the time had required open government data to be shared. And our local states in the US may also have data sharing policies with the research done by our, public tax dollars in our state, right? And the second reason why our STEM researchers, in our experience, would need research data management is because increasingly journals and publishers are encouraging or requiring it. So more and more they're requiring open data sharing, like I said, publishing their raw data after an embargo period, perhaps, or right away. And a lot of these publishers are also now requiring data availability statements. So whether or not you're sharing your data openly automatically or right away, they'll require the authors and the researchers to say and make explicit, where is your data available? Or will it always be available for, in perpetuity? Or is it only 5 years from now? Something like that. And it all, of course, depends on what type of data the person is working with. If it's, legally you can share it. If it's patient data from a physician, perhaps we wouldn't be sharing that personal identifiable information, right? So it all depends, right? But those are just two of the reasons why, and Brianna and I's experience, why our faculty are really looking for this type of training and this type of assistance. Some do, feel a moral obligation to do it, right? Kind of like open access. They want to be able to share their research or their data more broadly or widely with the world. And some are only doing it honestly because they're required to receive funding, or their journal said you have to do it or you won't publish in this top journal in the field, right? So I think, yeah, we'll flip and I'll pass it over to Brianna.
Great, thanks, Andrea. And I was just going to add to this in terms of like the drivers. These are, like Andrea said, the two major ones that we're seeing, but there have also been studies that suggest that have shown that papers that have associated data openly shared have higher citation rates overall. So it can be also kind of a benefit to the researcher in their current position to share their data. And also it's moving the research field forward, right? If people can actually understand what the data is, be able to reuse it in maybe ways that the original researcher had not thought of, it's advancing research overall. And so next we're going to move into kind of the area of our presentation, looking at kind of opportunities for you to either engage in research data management engagement opportunities or bring outreach around research data management to your own institutions. And there are many ways that this can be done, and they kind of fall along a scale with various factors that go in. So some of these opportunities are going to be really intensive to put on, and some are going to be more well suited for a smaller institution than a larger institution. It can also depend on how many people you have to provide the opportunity. So I just wanted to state that at the beginning to know that there are engagement opportunities for everyone, and depending on your resources, it's going to be what's kind of the best suited for your situation. And I just want to highlight, as I'm talking about this, that there is a book in our resources list that we're going to be providing. That's the Research Data Management Cookbook, and it actually outlines with icons those various components so that you can find what opportunities best suit your environment. And so I just wanted to mention that kind of some of the areas that these outreach and engagement opportunities fall into. So these can be things like development of actual research data management policies at your institution or organization. And it's been found that this can be a driver for engagement, in that if there is a policy, there's almost forced engagement. Additionally, there's requirements during the grant development process at some institutions, and they found that that's a really good way to engage with RDM because it's kind of that just-in-time approach. So they're reaching out to researchers as they're developing their grant proposals and needing to create those data management plans. Another great way for outreach engagement on these topics is through training and education, so both in workshops as well as in course instruction. These opportunities can not only teach the skills to participants, but it also can be an opportunity to advertise various other services that might be offered at your institution to support individualized support for these processes. Another opportunity are some dedicated events. At many institutions, they are doing things such as Love Your Data Week. There's also, and this actually has been brought online so that anybody can use it at their institution, is there's a data horror escape room that's been created out of University of Leiden, which is pretty fun. And they kind of have a whole event around this around Halloween, and they have people kind of go through this data horror escape room to learn about data management best practices. Other initiatives that happen are kind of these community of practice initiatives where librarians are engaging with researchers to have them become data champions or representatives in their respective areas, in their discipline where they have expertise in that, to bring to their peers these best practices around data management, as well as to bring back to kind of the library support the discipline-specific needs. Additionally, there are often one-to-one consultations, and then also at some institutions, one way of engagement is through the creation or support of the infrastructure for a data sharing or preservation repository, such as a data repository. And so to give a little bit more examples of this, we wanted to just give a brief overview of kind of what is the current research data management assistance at Penn State. And we've broken this up into 4 respective areas. And Andrea, as I go through this, feel free to hop in if there's anything you want to add. So we broke this up into first educational. So many of the assistances that we offer are educational. So we offer workshops on data management, how to create data management plans, how to discover and reuse data and assess it for reuse purposes, and kind of what are some best practices around storage, backup, version control. We also have workshops on actual active data management and sharing. So how are you documenting your data? What metadata standards are you using? How are you naming your files as you go through a project or folder organization? Additionally, as we have a larger team at Penn State, we do have support and individuals with specialized skills in data analysis and visualization. So we have a statistical data analyst that provides statistical consultations, and we have data analytics and visualization specialists. We also offer individual research appointments or consultations. We provide education at departmental meetings and also in courses for research methods courses in particular. Additionally, some of this can fall. Oh yeah, go ahead, Andrea.
I'm sorry, Brianna. I would say just to folks like attendees here, in my experience, the educational side of things might be, at least for me, it was my kind of entryway into the topic with my local campus community. I'm not a data scientist by trade. My background is not in any kind of computer programming or data science efforts, but I think as library employees, we have a lot of skill, transferable skills in this area. And if you were considering kind of offering this RDM assistance, maybe like at your institution, maybe your first step is to, teach yourself a little bit more. And then that way you can teach your constituents with that educational side. But I'll absolutely let Brianna talk about the more technical aspects because she is more well-versed in that. Thanks, Brianna.
Andrea, I think that's a great point though, because I do think I think the educational outreach is one of the most beneficial in that you're reaching many people. And also what we're finding is that many of these courses, especially for research methods courses, both in undergraduate level and at the graduate level, do not offer data management training. And so if you're able to engage on some of these topics, such as even like file naming best practices or folder organization best practices, so these kind of information data literacy best practices, we found that the students hugely benefit from this, especially if they can do it early in their research career and bring those practices back to their groups. And so as Andrea mentioned, there's also kind of technical support that can be offered and that we provide. So we provide reviews of data management plans. So this is if a researcher has a data management plan that they've created and want it to kind of be assessed before submitting with a proposal. And then we also provide consultations in areas such as active data management. So this would be kind of taking those educational topics, but working one-on-one with a researcher around like active data management, for instance. So working with them to organize their files, to create a version control system, to create a data backup protocol, and to document their data successfully. And that documentation thing is one of the key components of that FAIR principle, because data can't really be used or understood if it's not well documented. In addition, we also offer consultations for data analysis, data visualization, and support for researchers as they're preparing their data for publication and publishing it, either support for finding a repository that works best suited for their data, or if our institutional repository ScholarSphere is the best suited one, we help them with getting it into ScholarSphere and curate it on the back end. Some of the two other areas where there's assistance are in resource kind of creation and maintenance, as well as advocacy. So in terms of resources, we're often maintaining web resources on these topics. Andrea can speak more to this, but we also have library collection development in this area. We provide guidance for DMP creation through the DMP tool, which is a software provided out of that offers researchers the ability to use a template to create their data management plan. So this allows us to provide guidance that then allows them to create it and we can review it. We also provide templates for kind of recurring tasks, so DMP implementation or README file creation, trying to ease that process for researchers. And lastly, we can provide things like boilerplate language for data management plans for things such as our institutional repository. In terms of advocacy, and this is also a really good place that you might be able to start working in the research data management space and bringing this information just to the forefront, as sometimes it can be missed. So things such as monitoring funder and journal policies and making sure that our community or your community is aware of them. So this could be either talking to administrators or talking to researchers themselves. And an example of this would be NIH has a new data management and sharing policy that's going to come into effect in 2023. And so one of the big things that we're working on this year in the libraries is creating almost an awareness tour across our institution about this policy, so that it doesn't come as a surprise to anybody. You can also share your knowledge with the community, either through book chapters or research articles. And another thing that we partake in is responding to requests for information from policymakers or requests for comments as it relates to data management. So that NIH policy is an example of one where, as they were developing it, they asked institutions for their opinion or thoughts on what the policy looked like. We were able to then reach out to our researchers that we work with and bring that information back to NIH. And Andrea and I also wanted to highlight that we're trying to build on this and better scope and understand and tailor our trainings at Penn State. And in order to do this, we went out and conducted a survey of STEM researchers at across all Penn State campuses and across kind of graduate students and faculty to better understand what would they be interested in. Is what we're doing effective? What could we do to improve our engagement and outreach for research data management? And so we're going to go through kind of just 2 slides on that, but we have a lot more information as well that we asked in this survey. And so if you have questions about it, please feel free to reach out to us. But one of the questions that we asked, and then we wanted to present here because we feel that it could be kind of relevant potentially overall, since we asked across various campus sizes and individuals, is what type of research data management training would you be interested in? And we offered the options of kind of data ethics and consent, data for publication and sharing, how to store research data, how to document research data, how to cite research data, funder data management requirements, developing a data management plan, data licensing, data analysis and visualization, creating metadata for research data, copyright and intellectual property, and choosing a data repository. And those are those components on that y-axis. And on the x-axis, you can see the counts. So how many people said that was what they would be interested in. And the colors are by the disciplines. And so from this, you can see that for us, kind of a starting point where we're going to kind of target our efforts is making sure that we have good resources on developing data management plans. And then they had things like documenting research were high ones and creating metadata. So those are kind of some key areas that we can kind of focus on for our researchers.
And one quick thing as Brianna transitions to, we surveyed all of the STEM researchers on all of our campuses, and we also have information organized between faculty status as a STEM researcher as well as graduate student status, because of course they're 2 related demographics, but certainly not the same in every way. But what you're seeing on this slide, and I think the next one, is we've got it organized just by the STEM discipline. So if you were interested in seeing the differences, and we're going to talk about those, I think, a little later, but just as a heads up.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right, Andrea. And we have that information broken down. We also have it broken down by kind of campus size and research expenditure so that we can kind of better understand where is support needed. And one of our next questions was, what format do they want to see the research data management training in? And as you can see again on the y-axis are the options that we provided. So written documentation, webinars, tutorial videos, presentations, other, individual training with a STEM and research data management librarians, or department or lab training. And here we can see that the highest ones were tutorial videos and webinars. And this kind of makes sense given some of the information we also received in our focus groups. And so from this, we kind of planned for future assistance at Penn State. Some of the things we're interested in doing is we found from our focus groups that graduate students were more interested in those kinds of lengthy hands-on workshops. And they want it early in their graduate coursework so that they can apply it as they move forward. Whereas faculty, we found, were actually more interested in these bite-sized tutorials that they could do in their brief moments of free time if they get them. And so for that, we're hoping to kind of create some sort of short videos or podcasts that explain these kind of aspects of research data management. So breaking it apart into, here's a small kind of best practice that you could apply, try starting to apply this month until it kind of becomes habit. Additionally, we're interested in planning a research data management symposium at Penn State that would be university-wide, allowing for networking, and also allow researchers to connect with kind of various research support departments across the university. And this is something that's happening at other institutions, and they've had a lot of success with this. They've had success with bringing it forward where researchers actually get to think about and talk about their data management. We found even in our focus groups that the faculty don't often talk about these concepts, but we're really interested in hearing about what other people were doing and how they could improve their data management best practices. And so we're hoping that symposium can be one of our other engagement activities, but maybe a symposium is a large thing to take on. And so another example that was in that cookbook that could be an opportunity to do a very similar thing at a lower resource is this idea of data conversations. So just bringing researchers together, bringing, when we can be in person again, some food maybe, and getting them to kind of talk about what they're working on. And in the UK, they've had a lot of success with that. So with that, we also have mentioned that we have resources for further learning. And so we have a couple listed here, literature, kind of some interactive learning tools, and organizations that are really valuable to join if you kind of want to dip your toes into some of these topics. And Andrea, I believe, has placed in the chat our research list, which is more extensive than this and lists things, more literature, also some interactive activities that you can rapidly adopt into your own institution if interested. And with that, we will open it up for questions and also include our contact information. So feel free to ask us questions here, but also if you want to learn more about some of the work we're doing at Penn State or engagement opportunities, or are interested in just talking about data management, we would definitely be interested. And thank you for taking the time to listen to us this morning.
Okay, everyone, so we can open it up for questions. Andrea, I know you're keeping an eye on the chat too. Do you just want to address them or do you want me to point them out to you?
I think we can address them. Thanks, Christy. Okay. And I will say, and if folks, I wrote this in the chat too, just in case, if you're having issues viewing that resource list or you don't get to, save the link, contact us. We'll put our emails in the chat as well. We have that resource list organized similarly to the one slide, like we broke it down into literature that might be helpful, interactive resources for learning more, training programs you can do, different things like that, organization. So that's not an exhaustive list by any means, just some of Brianna and I's favorite things we have on there. So Lori asked, what's the best way to get started for a novice? And I will maybe answer that. And then Brianna, who I don't think is a novice at all, I certainly was. For me, I think the best way, and I wouldn't say this is maybe for everyone, right? But I got really interested in data management and research data management when I was in graduate school and learning about it. So I took the time to kind of just learn on my own, self-taught, going through different books, and we've included some of those. So I think for me, the best way as a novice when I was kind of starting with it was just reading literature. right? We all have experiences doing that in our work, I'm sure. Finding monographs that might be helpful that are written for a less, technical audience, right? So starting with some of the books, or we've even linked on that resource list, just a few articles if you're interested in the topic and you want to kind of learn more, like what do we all mean by RDM, or what your faculty might be interested in. So for me, I think the literature piece was the best part, and the earliest piece for me to learn. I've then kind of morphed into or evolved into doing some of these interactive learning things. There are great tutorials or workshops provided by ACRL to look at this. We've included a link to the Research Data Management Librarian Academy. It's a Canvas kind of work at your own pace resource. And Brianna and I had no part or effort in that. I think it came out in 2020 or maybe 2018 or 19, but you just sign in for an account via Canvas, and then you work through different modules and you can pick and choose which module. So that's been pretty helpful for me. And then I would say this kind of stems off the question, so I'm rambling, I apologize, but the best way for me to engage my own faculty on this was through helping them with their data management plan. That seemed like for me a way to get my foot in the door, because if my STEM researchers want to be publishing in something like PLOS or in Science or Nature, which they often do, they're required to have those data management plans. And oftentimes they have no idea what that even means, right? So that was a way for me to engage them, to kind of start the discussion. And then I have since been able to kind of network and build some more interaction with them. And what's helpful for me at Penn State Harrisburg is I feel like I have a good grasp on these kind of topics and preliminary work. But if they have questions about, data science and plotting their data with R, I can kind of pass them off to Brianna or some of our other colleagues with the technical experience to kind of keep them moving in the right direction, so to speak. So sorry, that was a long answer. And Brianna, I'm sure you have other things to share.
No, I think you hit the main things. I was just going to add is I do think some of those organizations like RDA, the Research Data Alliance, and RDAP, Research Data Access and Preservation Association, can be good places to kind of join a conference and assess kind of what might be going on in the field. It can be a little bit overwhelming because some things are kind of moving fast, but there are entry points into each of those. And I'd be happy to talk with anybody who's interested in that, but it's a good place to kind of see what's going on and what areas of it are you most interested in? Because as Andrea mentioned earlier, there are some components of research data management that are highly technical, but there are others that are not at all. Like there are groups solely about engaging researchers with data, and what are some different ways that we can do that. So that can be kind of a good group to attend. Or there's ones about specifically research data management in libraries, for instance, and how to kind of engage. But as Andrea mentioned, I think as a novice, kind of going through some of the literature and trainings that you can is a great place to start. And then also if there are data librarians or librarians at your institution that are doing things like reviewing data management plans, reaching out to them and seeing if they can kind of give you an overview of what that process looks like and how to kind of maybe start doing that yourself. I think Andrea mentioned that's a really great place to start.
Yeah, and if folks have the resource list open, you'll see I'm actually adding, because I just occurred to me when Brianna was answering some of these organizations. Brianna and I have also presented at a handful of data librarian symposiums, but you certainly, for me, they were also really helpful in just kind of learning about the topic, attending them. And the two that I'm going to put in here, which I don't have just yet, were great. And the cost to attend was, and in my experience, they've only been virtual right now because of the pandemic for the last few years, of course, but was something like $20. And I know not all of our institutions have funds to pay for that, but if you were interested, that's certainly much easier to pay perhaps than something like ALA, which is several $100s, that sort of thing. So we'll include that in there. And even if you can't attend the symposiums, a lot of times the presenters will share their slides or some, brief abstract to their piece, and you could contact them for follow-up later. So I'll make sure I include that as well.
Yeah, I think, Andrew, that's a good point. It's like a lot of these conferences do put their content either on YouTube afterwards. It might be a little bit delayed from the conference, but I know RDA has all of their previous sessions on YouTube, or many of them will also put them on OSF.
And while we give another minute to see if anyone else has any questions, I am going to post the evaluation link in the chat. So if everyone can at some point go in and complete that, that is very valuable for us and for the presenters to just have that feedback.
Thanks, Christy. I am going to type in our email addresses here. And Brianna, I will write yours down as well. If anyone is interested in following up, or maybe when you have some downtime, if any of you do, I know the semester just began, but if you wanted to follow up with us or something, piqued your interest, or maybe in a few months from now, you're reading through a book or a journal article and you have a question, please feel free to reach out to either of us. And we are happy to help, and we're happy to share our resources and certainly share our data. We're working on some research articles now about our recent project of our STEM disciplines and our STEM faculty. So we're more than happy to kind of share the things that we have created if it's helpful, so you don't have to feel like you're inventing the wheel at your campus or at your institution.
It looks like there's another question too. So It was, do you work with the IRB Office of Research on campus for outreach/referrals? And I can start that one, Andrea, if you want. And then I know you have examples from Harrisburg as well. So here at University, I'm at University Park, and I work very closely with our Office of Research in that, as well as our Institute for Computational Data Sciences, which house kind of our high computing computational resources. And we're looking to engage more with IRB. But in terms of that, a lot of referrals do come through there, in that as they're working through the data lifecycle, when data management planning comes up, it kind of gets sent over to our office. And so we're engaging with them in ways that we can improve that workflow, as well as those referrals that come through, because we're all kind of engaging in various parts of that research data lifecycle, and see various components of projects. But I think IRB is going to be a big one to engage with next. And I'll just add another thing that we do is through our it's kind of the ethics and conduct of research training for graduate students, is we're involved in that training as well. So the SARI training is a great place to start, which is closely related to IRB.
Yeah, that's great. And similar to Brianna, here at Penn State Harrisburg, we do have an Office of Outreach and Research that helps. It's a small department, but they help our faculty researchers with in all of our schools at Penn State Harrisburg. They help them with their grant pre-award and post-award. And I've had good luck and good experiences kind of partnering with them. So for the last few years, I have been offering a presentation just called, so you need a data management plan, right? Because a lot of times our researchers here at Harrisburg aren't even aware of what that is and why they would need it. And so I work with them, and we'll do kind of a collaborative presentation where our Office of Research and Outreach will present on grant deadlines and how they can help pre-award and post-award. And then I will go into, okay, so for your grant, you're required to have this, and here's what should be included, or here's why it's important for you. And in my experience, when I started doing this, our Office of Research and Outreach, they were sort of the mind of, well, I just want our faculty to have it in there so that we can submit this grant. And I, am more of the mind of like, well, I want the faculty researcher to know why it's important to have this in there, why it's being required. And if you think about, if we all think about our data before we jump into a project, it's easier to manage and to implement these kind of skills or strategies throughout. So that was a little bit of not necessarily headbutting at any point, but some folks are, and I work with faculty who are like that as well. Like, I just need it to be done. So what would you tell me to put in here, or how can I make it better? And then I'm going to submit it and never think about it again, which is sometimes, that's a shame in my opinion, but I get it. There's, faculty pressure on their time, and graduate students, of course, who in Brianna and I's experience, we've also heard in our focus groups that we did of, well, my professor, my lab director told me I needed to do this, but I have no idea what it is and they don't know to help me, but I'm supposed to do it now. So I think finding partners and collaborations that we can outside of the libraries for us has been really beneficial, but it comes with those sort of growing pains. So.
Yeah, and I'll just add, because Andrea, you reminded me, I think also collaborating with the research office can be really valuable in that they can see the data management plan as a valuable tool for assessing what resources does Penn State, for instance, need to have available and ready if this project gets funded. So things like large amounts of storage space, where is it going to be preserved in the long term? Is there any kind of compliance requirements that we need to be aware of? Are big areas that it kind of comes up. But they've been really great, I think, to collaborate with and make sure it, as I mentioned, it's also a good place for that advocacy approach. So if you're looking to kind of start engaging with them, making sure that they're aware of the various data sharing policies that are coming up and how that's going to affect researchers, and then what infrastructure needs to be developed at your respective institution to support researchers in that endeavor.
So I think we can give it one more minute, and then if no more questions come through, we can let everyone have an extra few minutes. So I want to thank both of you, and all of you for coming and presenting and or watching the presentation. Ronali, I think we're probably okay to stop the recording. And as a reminder, the recording